Dr. Joshua Tepper is a family physician and an Assistant Deputy Minister in Ontario at the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. He leads the Health Force Ontario Health Human Resources Strategy, reporting also to the Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities. He has been involved in health policy and research relating to health human resources at both the provincial and national levels. Joshua was president of both the Canadian Federation of Medical Students and the Provincial Association of Interns and Residents of Ontario. He has sat on the board of both the Canadian Medical Association and the Ontario Medical Association. Joshua co-chairs the Physician Services Committee, a joint committee between the Ministry of Health and the OMA, and he is also a member of the Joint Provincial Nursing Committee.
I've actually been involved in leadership roles for some time, and certainly medical leadership roles right from the beginning of medical school. I was involved in the Canadian Federation of Medical Students in many ways, eventually becoming the president, and then in residency became the president of the Professional Association of Interns and Residents of Ontario, involved in the National Residency Association CARE. After I graduated, I was on a number of OMA committees, Ontario Medical Association committees, and I was involved with the Society of Rural Physicians of Canada, including being the vice president, and a number of other roles, and then my current role as well within government. So I think, there's been others, but I've always sort of been interested in the area of physician leadership and playing a leadership role myself. A large part of that motivation actually has been to work in the area of marginalized populations, or to focus on areas of access to care, particularly given my interest in rural and inner city populations. And that started right as a medical student, and my roles there, and carried right through. And so a lot of my work has been about making sure that in a publicly funded healthcare system, everybody has access to that care, particularly those who face unique challenges due to language, or due to geography, or due to the type of illnesses or social circumstances they find themselves in. So that has all been a fairly strong motivating force in the types of roles I've taken on, and the reasons why. I think probably the biggest privilege in my life has been the chance to work with patients, and is my clinical work. Just those one-on-one interactions, and just the honesty that comes within a patient-physician relationship is so unique and so privileged. But at the same point, I think I've always been very conscious that it's encapsulated within a framework, in our case, our publicly funded healthcare system. And I've worked in the US, but there's always some system in which that individual dynamic takes place. There's a framework, a structure. And so much of what you want to create for your patient are opportunities that require you to look at the box around you. And so that, the personal satisfaction that comes with the patient is, like I said, an unbelievable privilege. But to create all the opportunities that I want for that individual requires looking at the box that encapsulates that relationship and working on the bigger box to reshape it, to broaden it, to change its nature. And the leadership opportunities have been a chance and an opportunity to think about that box that I work in as a frontline clinician. Maintaining a clinical practice has always been absolutely paramount for me. And I've gone to tremendous lengths to maintain a clinical practice. I deliver babies at Mount Sinai Hospital. I do some emergency room shifts. And I have an inner city practice right in the heart of downtown. It's small. It's a small practice, obviously a very challenging population. But I try to do at least a night a week on call if I can, and at least a clinic in the evening, and sometimes I can do 2 clinics. But that has always been incredibly important, mainly for my soul, but I also think for physician leadership. Maintaining clinical practice is very important in terms of credibility. And I think we're somewhat different than other professions in that way. I think, to take nursing as an example, fantastic nursing leadership within the province, hospital CEOs and all sorts of tremendous leadership in our nursing community. But what you see very quickly is whether they have to or they choose to, they make decisions. between either an administrative or leadership and management role or a clinical. Physicians traditionally have found the opportunity to maintain clinical practice if they wish. I think it's incredibly important. It's a tremendous privilege that our profession is structured in a way that allows us to maintain a bit of both. I think it's tremendously, for me, feeds the soul. It also keeps me grounded. I think that's the other thing. Beyond credibility, I think you're just constantly learning and shaping your leadership thinking or whatever it is that you're doing on a systems level by what you're seeing on the front lines of the patient. It's tremendously, it's where a lot of the innovation and the inspiration comes from, is from the ongoing contact with patients. And again, the reason I'm interested in the leadership role is only to improve that patient relationship that I have and thinking about that broader box around it. So if I take myself away from that frontline perspective, I lose some of that grounding and I lose some of that motivation and stimulation and innovation that I get that fosters and makes me a better system leader. It's been a little while now. I think certainly complexity. The healthcare system is unbelievably complex, incredibly organic, and therefore the ripple effects of any one piece are so difficult to predict and so difficult to understand, even with a lot of experience. But certainly getting in, you're always seeing just a tip of the iceberg. And as you get more opportunities, you get to see a little bit deeper under the water, a little bit deeper, and see the entirety of this healthcare system, or at least more and more of it. And then also, like I said, part of it's the size, but it's not just the size, it's the complexity, it's the interrelationships, it's the interconnectedness, and how there can be so easily unintended consequences, how so easily what can be completely correct from one lens and through one deeply held commitment that you undertake or activity that you undertake can have some very negative consequences in another part. And getting into healthcare leadership, just becoming aware of that risk and becoming aware of that reality is huge. And like I said, it's organic. It changes. And just even within a short time of being out of one leadership role and then going back into that environment, you can see the context can really change. And so just, again, that always struck me as quite remarkable. There's a couple big joys. I would say three. So first of all, again, is just the opportunity to work in another facet to improve the life for the patient, for their family, for their community. The second thing is the camaraderie. To be in a room with some unbelievably bright, intelligent, passionate, committed people is just one of the most amazing things. And it's flying on the plane with them to the meeting or taking a taxi ride from the airport to the meeting. And to be in the room with some of these unbelievably phenomenal individuals, smart, experienced, compassionate, thoughtful, and to be within that environment is great. And then I think the third thing about leadership, which is great, is the intellectual stimulation. It just makes you think differently. It uses different parts of your brain, different parts of your skill sets. It develops different competencies. And I think we're all lifelong learners as doctors. And this is just another component of that sort of intellectual drive and that commitment or the opportunity to have lifelong learning in a different part than just in the biological or the clinical environment. And so those are really three wonderful privileges and opportunities of leadership. Physicians have always had an incredibly, and still have, an incredibly important central role in the healthcare system. Tremendous power, tremendous presence, tremendous opportunity in the healthcare system. And that is inevitably a bit of both a tremendous opportunity and a privilege and a responsibility, but it also creates a bit of a challenge because there can be tensions and animosity from others because of that privileged role and because of the amount of power and central position that you have within the healthcare system, so it can create some tension with other providers. It also is a responsibility, I think, and how to use that opportunity and to use that position to its best and most thoughtful effect is something that you know is a challenge in itself. You want to be thoughtful, you want to be careful, you want to be respectful. So that's one piece, is to be responsible, and at the same point to respect the tensions, the opportunities you have, the position as a physician you have, and to understand the tensions that it creates with others around you in the healthcare system is certainly one challenge. And then I think, you know, physicians are an amazing group. You know, they're thoughtful, like many others. They're thoughtful, well-educated, etc. It's how do we work together collaboratively, and how do you really understand that regardless of our roles and our different leadership roles or our different roles within a healthcare system, management, clinician, whatever, that we're really all pulling for the same team. And that just because you're president of this or CEO of that, or you're doing this committee or that committee, in no way puts you necessarily adversarial to what are core to the attributes of a healthcare provider or physician, which is caring for the patient, improving it for the family and the individual, and making the healthcare system function for society. And realizing that those core values are the same regardless of the role you're playing. And having people understand that, and never losing sight of that regardless of what role you're playing. Relationships are critical to, I think, any leadership role. I think for leaders, perhaps in another sector, you can be a leader without relationships. I doubt it, having looked a little bit at the literature. But certainly within healthcare, your effectiveness as a leader is only as good as the relationships you've built. Where I've succeeded, I've been able to develop, and I've nurtured, and I've built strong relationships. And where I've not been as successful, it's because often, not necessarily exclusively, because of that inability. And again, healthcare, so complicated, so many players in the system, everything's so interconnected in very intricate ways, that it's all about being able to see the relationships, developing relationships, and using those relationships to a common goal. I certainly think it can be. I think that is a huge risk. And I've certainly experienced more than my fair share anyways, I wouldn't say more, but certainly my fair share of loneliness, finding myself in leadership roles. And it's somewhat, on the one hand, it's somewhat validating, because you know that's what the literature says, and you say, well, perfect, I'm right in there with the literature. That's a nice N of one example of what the literature says. But I think realistically, you own the responsibility for that. And there are certain things about leadership that put you in a position of potentially being lonely, but the degree to which that risk comes to fruition is largely up to you. You have to be thoughtful and careful about what relationships you make, and what you share, and where and with whom, and the friendships you build. You have to be very conscious and self-aware and reflective about the risks and the implications. But at the same point, to the degree that you feel that loneliness, it's a responsibility you have to mitigate. So it is a risk, but it is not an absolute by any means. And I think as a thoughtful leader, if you're going to do reflective leadership, and if you're going to be committed to a path of leadership, you anticipate that risk and you proactively manage it. And I think I've gotten a lot better at that over time. I think the risk is overextension. I think the risk is taking on too much. There's so much to do in healthcare. There's so many opportunities. There are so many needs to be filled. There are so many fundamentally important things that need to be done, that it's hard sometimes to really stay focused and not to take on and to overextend yourself. And the ability to say no, the ability to stay focused is critical. And it's when I haven't done that that I have had probably my failures or my lack of success. And I haven't sort of realized the potential I think I can bring is when I've overextended. And I think it's hard. I think as physicians we're used to multitasking. I think as physicians we're used to having a huge bandwidth in terms of the knowledge and change of that knowledge. And I think we're trained to be able to take on a lot. And yet everybody has limits, and some, mine may have greater limits than others, but ultimately everybody has limits to what they can do in a day, in a week, in a moment in time. And I think, again, being able to focus, not overextend, is critical. And it is, and when I've overextended, that's when I've run into trouble. I think time with family for me is critical, particularly my son. Is incredibly important to me. And then the second thing is clinical practice. When I don't get a chance because of travel or the pace of the leadership change I'm working on or whatever I'm working on in a given leadership role, and I'm not able to get back to clinical practice for a period of even just 2 weeks, I miss it. It really, for me, the patient contact feeds the soul. The patient contact grounds me. The patient contact, going in and working with my healthcare team, working with my nurses, working with the social worker, I work in a homeless shelter, so it's the people in the kitchen serving the meals. It's the people who are walking the streets handing out syringes and condoms. That's my team, that's my healthcare team. It's the patients we have who are also helping to prepare the meals and going and picking up clothing. They're part of our healthcare team. When I'm separated from that community, I lose my ability or my desire to, in some of what I do in my management leadership roles. And so a lot of my resiliency, it comes from maintaining a clinical practice. And of course my son, and playing with Transformers and Bakugans and going to the zoo and rolling around in splash pads is as restorative as anything can be, just as seeing my patients and being part of that healthcare team that's so remarkable. Those are, for me, my 2 feeders. There's just so much happening in healthcare right now, and there's such potential. And I just feel over the last several years, we put certain planks down internationally, nationally, and certainly in Ontario, some fundamental elements of change. A focus on quality, a focus on interprofessional care, a focus on regionalization and service integration, a focus on new models of care that reflect all of those things: quality, interprofessional, service integration. They are, and we're sort of just getting there. We've laid down the planks of this, the outline, if you will. And now to actually start to push that forward, to really see what it can mean, to really see what the next 20 years of healthcare can be like, driven by principles of quality, patient-centered care, integrated care across a continuum of disease, a focus on value. Those, that potential, that language that we're now using every day, that wasn't there 5 or 10 years ago or 7 years ago, that's now commonplace, and some of that infrastructure that's in place, and infrastructure in terms of legislation and regulation and funding and leadership capacity and all of that, seeing what we can do for patients and for the healthcare system in that environment, unbelievably exciting. Just incredible potential. We really are just at the cutting edge of transforming healthcare. And these are the types of language and the types of planks that you're seeing in all sorts of healthcare systems, nationally and internationally, and sort of really see how we start to deliver care differently. Just what a time to be in healthcare.